This morning, we're currently targeting for the release of Cygnus from the Canadarm2, which you see here aboard the International Space Station at 11:08 a.m. Central Time. Today's release is being controlled by flight controllers here in Mission Control Houston. Teams are being led today by Flight Director Allison Bollinger, who is currently taking a go, no-go poll from the flight controllers around the room for release. She's joined on console to her right by Capcom Steven Zenter. You'll hear calls from Capcom to the station crew from time to time today as the teams step through procedures for Cygnus release. Today's visiting vehicle officer is Jerry Yancheris. He'll be communicating directly with the Northrop Grumman flight controllers in Dulles, Virginia, relaying vehicle status and updates back to teams here in Mission Control Houston. And leading the team in Dulles, Virginia is Northrop Grumman Mission Director Paul Brower. Teams in Dulles are keeping tabs on the Cygnus vehicle and will take over full control of the spacecraft once it crosses over the approach ellipsoid today. The approach ellipsoid is that invisible line around the space station measuring 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer by 2 kilometers. So once Cygnus departs the neighborhood this morning, joint operations will end and Northrop Grumman teams here will take full control of the spacecraft. Cygnus was previously attached to the space station's Earth-facing side of the Unity module until about 7:40 a.m. Central Time this morning, when flight controllers here used the space station's Canadarm2 robotic arm to unbolt Cygnus from that Earth-facing port. They maneuvered the vehicle over the next few hours into this position, the release position where we see it right now. Monitoring the departure of Cygnus this morning from the International Space Station will be NASA astronaut and commander of the space station, Chris Cassidy. He'll take his position in the cupola module of the orbiting laboratory, where he'll have a great view of the Canadarm2 and the spacecraft as it makes its way out of the space station vicinity and back toward Earth. Once Cygnus is released from the Canadarm2 today, we'll see a series of milestones before it burns up in the Earth's atmosphere. The first of those will be a departure burn lasting about 3 minutes, moving the spacecraft safely away from the space station and toward the keep-out sphere. That's about 200-meter radius outside of the space station, one of those milestones built into the departure. And afterward, we'll be waiting until Cygnus crosses the approach ellipsoid. That's that 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer by 2 kilometer line we discussed, and where joint operations will end. However, that will not be the end of Cygnus's mission. It will remain in orbit as it conducts some experiments on board, as well as ejects some CubeSat satellites. Each Cygnus spacecraft is named after an influential individual in the world of spaceflight, and the Cygnus spacecraft for this mission is dedicated to U.S. Air Force Major Robert Lawrence, who was the first African-American astronaut selected by any program, specifically chosen for the Air Force's Manned Orbital Laboratory program in June of 1967. Lawrence died in F-104 Starfighter aircraft accident at Edwards Air Force Base 6 months later at the age of 32.
Station Houston on 2 for Cygnus.
Go ahead.
We're calling you 2 minutes early. We are go for Cygnus configuration checks. Perform step 2 in 1.602, Cygnus release and departure monitoring.
Copy step 2.
The Cygnus spacecraft you see here began its journey to the International Space Station on February 15th this year when it launched from the Wallops Flight Facility in Virginia. The Antares rocket lifted off to the International Space Station carrying with it about 7,500 pounds of science, research, crew supplies, and vehicle hardware. Cygnus arrived to its capture point about 2 days later on February 18th, 3 days later that is, with NASA astronaut Andrew Morgan at the controls of Canadarm2 robotic arm for capture, as NASA astronaut Jessica Meir backed him up and monitored the systems. A few hours after capture, Cygnus was installed to the Earth-facing side of the station's Unity module, where it has remained since. Checkouts for the Cygnus vehicle continue to proceed nominally here today. Still looking for a departure at 11:08 a.m. Central Time.
Houston, does that put step 3 2 minutes early as well, or will step 3 be at 16:06?
And Chris will be commanding release at 16:08. So step 3 will be about 16:06.
Copy.
As we mentioned, the release of Cygnus today will be commanded by flight controllers here on the ground rather than astronauts aboard the space station. Once that command is sent, the snares on the robotic arm's latching end effector, which is essentially the hand of the robotic arm, will open and we'll begin to see separation of the vehicle. The spacecraft will start to slowly drift away as it completes that departure burn, and flight controllers here will begin to retract the arm. This view of Cygnus attached to the robotic arm is coming to you live from the International Space Station, which is currently 263 statute miles over the North Pacific Ocean. Cygnus and the space station are about to cross the Terminator line. That's an invisible line separating the day and nighttime portions of the orbits around Earth. Within 24 hours of its release today, Cygnus will begin its secondary mission and conduct 2 burns to raise its altitude, allowing it to safely deploy a series of CubeSats. Cygnus is also hosting the Spacecraft Fire Safety Experiment 4, or SAFIRE 4, which provides an environment to safely study fire in microgravity. Earlier this week, robotics controllers also attached the popular but now defunct HDEV, or High Definition Earth Viewing Experiment, on the outside of Cygnus for disposal. HDEV reached its end of life last year after 5 years in service, providing live views of Earth to over 300 million viewers. After its stay in space since February 18th, Northrop Grumman flight controllers in Dulles, Virginia will initiate Cygnus deorbit burn to burn up in the Earth's atmosphere on Friday, May 29th, disposing of nearly 4,500 pounds of trash during its fiery re-entry over the Pacific Ocean. And just about 8 minutes away until Cygnus is released from the Canadarm2. Both Cygnus and the International Space Station currently soaring 262 statute miles over the North Pacific Ocean. NASA astronaut Chris Cassidy is standing by in the cupola module of the International Space Station, where he has an excellent view of both Cygnus and the Canadarm2. We're currently in a satellite handover, a carefully planned and tracked handover of satellite systems, and we expect to regain vision of Cygnus as it departs the International Space Station very soon. Another recap of those milestones we'll be looking out for this morning after Cygnus is released. The first is that departure burn lasting 3 minutes, and the next will come when Cygnus departs the keep-out sphere, that 200-meter radius around the International Space Station. Cygnus will continue moving away from the station and then exit the approach ellipsoid, another invisible line that helps us monitor where the vehicles are and their movements once they're in the neighborhood of the space station. Once Cygnus exits the approach ellipsoid, joint operations will end, and Northrop Grumman teams will take full control of the spacecraft. We are now 5 minutes out from the release of Cygnus from the International Space Station. Once again, that command will be coming from flight controllers here on the ground rather than astronauts aboard the space station. And just 3 minutes away from that scheduled release of Cygnus at 11:08 a.m. Central Time.
Station Houston on 2 for Cygnus.
Right.
We are go for Cygnus departure on time at 16:08. Perform steps 3 and 4 in 1.602. Cygnus release and departure monitoring.
And work.
That was the voice of NASA astronaut Chris Cassidy at the Cupola module monitoring the release of the Cygnus vehicle today. Everything continuing to move along as planned for Cygnus, just 2 minutes away from that ground-commanded release. Less than 1 minute until the release of the Cygnus resupply spacecraft from the Canadarm2 aboard the International Space Station.
Station Houston on 2. ISS thrusters are inhibited and ground M1 is go for release on time.
Station copies.
And we have confirmation the release window for Cygnus is open.
Station Houston on 2, proceeding with release.
Blue.
Release commanded.
And the release of Cygnus has been commanded. Those latches are now in motion, preparing to release the vehicle.
Unlatch blue. Ridge blue. Open blue.
And we copy all. Snares open. Begin monitoring for drift out.
And at 11:09 Central Time, as Cygnus and the International Space Station were flying 260 statute miles over the Pacific Ocean, we have release of the spacecraft. This is a view from the latching end effector, that hand of the Canadarm2, as the spacecraft and the latching end effector on the arm itself begin to back away from one another.
Has exited the lee.
Houston copies. We are proceeding with back away.
Copy.
NASA astronaut Chris Cassidy continuing to monitor from the cupola windows of the International Space Station as back away of the Cygnus spacecraft continues.
Back away in progress.
Copy.
Cygnus and the Canadarm2 now 1.5 meters away from each other, everything continuing to proceed smoothly. Again, that departure at 11:09 a.m. Central Time this morning as Cygnus and the space station were flying 260 statute miles over the Pacific Ocean. Cygnus is loaded with over 4,500 pounds of trash to be disposed on May 29th when it exits Earth's orbit in a fiery re-entry into the atmosphere.
Station Houston on 2, back away complete.
Step 4 in work.
Copy.
And that was Capcom Steven Zenter confirming that the backaway of the Canadarm2 is now complete.
Cygnus depart commanded.
We copy and see the same.
And as Cygnus is flying free, we have confirmation the spacecraft's 3-minute departure burn is underway.
Station Houston, Cygnus departure burn is in progress. Monitor departure burn, step 5 in 1.602.
Copy, step 5 in work.
This departure burn will move Cygnus a safe distance away from the space station, crossing over the approach ellipsoid eventually. Once Cygnus exits the neighborhood of the space station, Northrop Grumman teams will take full control of the spacecraft to begin its secondary mission of the Sapphire 4 experiment and those CubeSat deployments. Approximately 2 minutes left of the departure burn. And another satellite handover as Cygnus continues its departure burn away from the International Space Station. The next milestone we'll be looking for is it to exit the keep-out sphere. flight controllers here in Mission Control Houston, continuing to monitor the departure of the Cygnus resupply spacecraft from the International Space Station, where it has resided since February 18th, 2020.
Step 6 complete.
Station Houston on 2, we concur. Cygnus departure burn complete.
We now have confirmation that the departure burn is complete. That 3-minute burn continuing to move the spacecraft outside of the vicinity of the space station.
Station Houston on 2 for Cygnus.
Go ahead.
Chris, with the departure burn complete, you are no longer required to monitor, and we'll just be giving you a couple of calls as it completes the departure sequence.
Okay, copy that. I want to give a real quick shout out to my friend and teammate from Expedition 36, Gary Horlacher, is flight director, has been the one since 2008, and he's moving on from sit in console. Gary, it's been a pleasure working with you. Best of luck. Fair winds following season in your next endeavor. Enjoyed working with you, buddy.
And Gary appreciates the kind words, and we all feel the same way. He will be missed here in the control center. Station Houston on 2, Cygnus has exited the 200-meter keep-out sphere.
Copy.
And with that, Cygnus has now exited the keep-out sphere, that 200-meter radius around the space station. Once again, Cygnus was released from the Canadarm2 robotic arm at 11:09 a.m. Central Time today, as the International Space Station and Cygnus were flying 260 statute miles over the Pacific Ocean. It then conducted a 3-minute departure burn to move a safe distance away from the space station, and Cygnus is now heading toward its final milestone of the day, the approach ellipsoid. Once Cygnus crosses over the approach ellipsoid, that 1-kilometer line around the space station, joint operations will end, and the Northrop Grumman team that you see here in Dulles, Virginia, will take full control of the spacecraft. When Cygnus arrived on February 18, 2020, it brought with it over 7,500 pounds of supplies, crew, hardware, investigations, and more. Of that 7,500 pounds, about 2,200 pounds of it were science investigations. 1,570 pounds were crew supplies, and another 179 pounds were spacewalk equipment. Just one day after its arrival, science freezers containing research examples were removed from Cygnus and installed in express racks aboard the space station. Cygnus also delivered the Osteomics 02 study, helping us learn more about how to prevent bone loss on Earth and in space. There was a variety of research hardware on Cygnus, over 3,000 pounds, which the crew integrated and activated in station systems. That included a new mobile space lab, which is a tissue and cell culturing facility, and was installed and powered up on the station's express racks. A majority of the research aboard the station is dedicated to understanding how the human body adapts and thrives in microgravity. There's also a lot of parallels between health challenges in space and different ailments on Earth, with some space-based treatments translating directly to helping people here on Earth. The International Space Station is our orbiting laboratory, and it serves as a test bed as we continue to move forward toward placing the first woman and next man on the moon by 2024 with the Artemis program. In about 5 minutes, we'll be looking for Cygnus to exit the approach ellipsoid. This is the second milestone for Cygnus, having earlier departed the keep-out sphere. These invisible lines are also where we have checkpoints for vehicles as they approach the space station, helping flight controllers monitor the spacecraft and their movements once they're in the vicinity of our orbiting laboratory. This view looking straight down from the International Space Station as it soars west of Argentina, 269 statute miles above Earth. We'll be looking for confirmation of Cygnus exiting the approach ellipsoid in just a few moments. Release of Cygnus this morning was monitored by NASA astronaut Chris Cassidy aboard the International Space Station. Also living aboard the space station right now are Roscosmos cosmonauts Anatoly Ivanishin and Ivan Wagner. They arrived at the orbiting laboratory a little over a month ago on April 9th, 2020. These three spacefarers are looking to be joined by NASA astronauts Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley in about 2.5 weeks as we look to launch America with the Commercial Crew Demo 2 mission with SpaceX, the first launch of American astronauts from American soil since the retirement of the Space Shuttle in 2011.
Station Houston on 2 for Cygnus.
Right on 2.
Cygnus has exited the approach ellipsoid, and the team in NCC Houston would like to say congratulations to the teams around the globe who have supported the successful NG-13 joint mission at the ISS. We wish the Cygnus team all the best as they continue their mission, and we thank them for honoring the legacy of Major Robert H. Lawrence.
And moments ago, you heard Capcom capsule communicator Steven Zinter confirming Cygnus is now outside of the approach ellipsoid, leaving the vicinity of the space station. Now joint operations have ended for the spacecraft, and Northrop Grumman teams will take full control. Recapping some of the events from today, at 7:40 a.m. Central Time this morning, flight controllers here in Mission Control Houston used the space station's Canadarm2 robotic arm to unbolt Cygnus from the Earth-facing side of the station's Unity module and maneuvered the vehicle into its release position. With Chris Cassidy monitoring its departure from the orbiting laboratory, Cygnus was set free at 11:09 a.m. Central Time as the International Space Station was flying 260 statute miles over the Pacific Ocean. Cygnus then conducted its 3-minute departure burn to move safely from the station, eventually exited the keep-out sphere about 200 meters away, and the final milestone came just minutes ago when Cygnus crossed over the approach ellipsoid. Joint operations now ended, and Northrop Grumman teams in full control of the spacecraft. As we mentioned, the mission for Cygnus is not over. And over the next several hours, Cygnus will begin its secondary mission, conducting some burns to raise its altitude, where it will safely deploy some CubeSats. It'll also remain in orbit for the next few weeks to conduct the study of the spacecraft fire safety experiment, or SAFIRE 4, providing the opportunity to study fire in microgravity. After its arrival in space on February 15th and to the space station on February 18th, Cygnus' time in space will end as it disposes of nearly 4,500 pounds of trash during its fiery re-entry into the Earth's atmosphere above the Pacific Ocean on May 29th. With Cygnus now safely departed from the vicinity of the International Space Station, that will wrap up our release coverage for today. Have a great week. This is Mission Control Houston.